Hello and welcome to Chicken Chats. We're so glad you're here with us today. Hope you were loving those crab cores at the beginning. Those are Jeanette's own crab core roosters. They are super fun. I know I love this intro. I might be the only one.
Well, I do. I like them. Crab cores for everyone.
That's right. Yay! We're so glad you're flocking to join us today on our very last Chicken Chat. We have some wonderful special guests joining us today. We have Jeanette Behringer, our poultry resident extraordinaire, and our program manager, our senior programs manager. We have Julie Gauthier, who is a poultry veterinarian. So she'll be able to answer all of your awesome questions today. Please leave those comments in the chat, and we will get started with those a little bit after our chat today. I'm Brittany Sweeney. I am the communications manager with the Livestock Conservancy. And without further ado, Jeanette, do you want to introduce Julie?
Oh, absolutely. Julie is one of my favorite poultry people.
Oh, and thank you.
I remember I accidentally met her at an American Poultry Association show up in Indianapolis, I think.
Right.
Was where you and I met the first time.
Show.
And I had a photo booth and saw these extraordinary Saxony ducks. And I'm like, I got to photograph these. And so I left a note on the cage, and Julie came over. I was so thrilled to get the note. Yeah. And Julie came over, and we were photographing her beautiful ducks. And I'm like, where did you get these ducks? They're gorgeous. And she had bred them. And then come to find out, she only lives like an hour away from us here in North Carolina. And I'm like, you get to know this lady. And then found out she was a poultry specialist and veterinarian. And we've become friends over the years. And she's been a fount of information. And whenever I panic about health issues or disease outbreaks, Julie's my go-to. And I was hoping today that we could talk about a few things that, I've run into that a lot of people that are new to poultry, and even people that, aren't so new. God, I'm going to have bad hair day today. There's just things that people don't realize. These are some of the basics they need to think about for keeping poultry. And being a veterinarian, I know you're particularly sensitized to, these issues. And I guess I'd like to start with, biosecurity is a huge thing, and it's a word that scares a lot of people, ooh, biosecurity. And they're really simple things that you can do to promote good biosecurity on your farm. And it's not like you have to be, in lockdown with Tyvek suits. But could you talk a little bit about the basic biosecurity that folks could be practicing on their farms so that they keep their flocks healthy and minimize the danger that their birds could get accidentally sick from some silly thing that they didn't think about?
Oh, yeah, I can't say the word biosecurity enough, and it really should not scare anyone, because every farm can have, every backyard can have their own custom biosecurity plan, and you don't have to spend a lot of money, and you need to do things that focus on the big risks and not sweat the small stuff, because you can drive yourself crazy. So figure out what your big risks are and try to address those. Also, don't worry about the things that you don't have any control over, like your neighbor. That just fix the things that you can work on, and everybody can do it. In fact, you need to, because with chickens, by the time you're talking about treatment, it's generally too late. So prevention really is the only way to go, is to keep your flock healthy and not have to start asking people, how do I treat this, and what's killing my chickens? Really focus on those biosecurity parts. And yeah, go ahead.
Well, and let's walk through that. So to start, the first thing I tell everybody is quarantine. And a lot of folks skip over that. So what's your recommendation for minimum quarantine, and what exactly is quarantine? Is that putting your bird in a plastic box on the far side of the farm, or, what would be good quarantine for a small household farm?
You
household
have
flock.
hit the big risk. So the big risk for us is bringing new birds home. It's the birds that are going to be your biggest risk as far as introducing disease to your flock. So you need to be really careful about where you get them. And then when you do bring them home, the quarantine is a great way to introduce them to your flock to minimize the risk that they're going to bring a new disease into your flock. So for a quarantine, I like to use I call it the 30-30 rule. So you want to do it for 30 days, and you want to keep your new birds that you've just brought home 30 feet away from all of your other birds. So it's just a general rule. There's not a lot of science backing that. It's kind of my common sense rule. But generally, no chicken's going to sneeze over 30 feet, right? So if you can separate them from your others, and all the birds that you brought in on that day should stay together in their separate area, 30 feet away from the rest of your flock. And what that's going to do, that time period is going to give you a chance to see if something pops up in that new flock. Maybe there was something you didn't notice when you originally picked them up. They look great. But then the incubation period, works its way, and the chickens become sick. They might be sneezing, they might have diarrhea, they might just not look right. And you'll have a chance to see that before you've put them in with your birds and given them whatever they have. And here's the hard part about quarantine. If you see a sick bird in quarantine, it should never go into your flock, okay? You're going to have to deal with that. If at the end of the 30 days, all the birds look great, you haven't seen any signs of illness in those birds, then you can go ahead and introduce them to your flock. That's a little more risky than what some other people can practice, which is all in, all out, which means all of the birds come in at the same time and they all leave at the same time before you get new birds. But for many of us backyard flock owners, it's not really practical that we do this all in, all out practice. The other thing you can do is what's called a closed flock, which is you raise your own replacements and you don't bring any new birds in at all. So those are the least risky practices. But if you have to bring in new birds while you still have old birds at your place, then the quarantine is a measure that you can take to hopefully minimize the risk that you're going to bring something in with those birds. The other important part about that is you really should keep your areas for your baby birds, your chicks and your young birds that you're starting away from your adult birds. So they need to have their separate area. And you definitely don't want to have your quarantine birds near your baby birds. So you want to have them, your hospital area where you might be treating a sick bird, or your quarantine area. You want to have those completely separate from especially your babies and also your adult flock.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also think it's real important, you separate the birds, but to remind folks that, when you're feeding and cleaning, leave the quarantine birds for last. Absolutely. So that you're not crossing over stuff and, and don't mix up food bowls or anything. When it's quarantine, the quarantine stuff is here and your regular stuff's here, and don't mix it up. That's
another good practice for backyard flock owners is for one biosecurity measure you can take is to plan your chore route every day. So you would start from cleanest to dirtiest. So your healthy birds do your sick birds last, and then your youngest to oldest. So you would start the day taking care of your baby birds, your chicks in the brooder, your hatchery, and then you would move on to the older groups. And then the very last thing you should do is to take care of any sick birds or any birds that are in quarantine. And then after you're done, you go back to the house, you change your clothes, take a shower, wash your hands several times before you go back out to the birds and start working with them again.
Yeah. Another issue that we get a lot of questions on, and there are varying opinions on it, and this is one that's come into my life recently via infectious bronchitis, is to vaccinate or not to vaccinate. And how do you make the decision if you need to vaccinate, and how do you know what to vaccinate for? Do you look to like your local extension to give you advice on that, or is there basic guidelines that folks should take a look at to make those decisions?
Yes, there are a couple of, first of all, if you don't know what you should be vaccinating for, you shouldn't be vaccinating. That's the basic bottom line there. You want to, vaccination, it's really important to remember that vaccination is not going to prevent a disease from getting into your flock. That's not a biosecurity tool. Vaccination is a good tool once you have a problem in your flock or in your neighborhood to control a disease. Vaccination doesn't, in chickens anyway, most of the vaccines do not completely prevent a bird from becoming infected. What they're really good at is preventing clinical signs of disease. So they may not be as sick, they may not get sick at all, and it reduces the amount of germs that they grow in their bodies and shed to the rest of the birds and into the environment. The vaccines are very good at doing that. So you can see how that would be a tool to control a disease once you have it in your flock, but it's not really something that I would recommend for people to do to prevent disease from coming into your flock. The thing you need to do for that is biosecurity. There's one exception, and that is Marek's disease. And I would say that if you have the opportunity, if your hatchery that is sending you your chicks offers Marek's disease vaccine, take it. It may not completely prevent Marek's disease in your flock, but it's likely to help, and it's safe. So I would recommend anybody who has the option to have their chicks sent to them vaccinated for Marek's disease, go ahead and do that. That is also something that you can purchase yourself and give to your chickens. It's very easy to do. Doesn't require needles. Excuse me, that one does require needles. And it's tricky because the vaccine itself, once you open that vial, is not good for very long. You've got a couple of hours, you need to use it, and then you need to throw it away because the virus in there is going to die. So that's something that a lot of times people who start vaccinating their flock will not realize, that that vaccine is so sensitive that they need to open the vial and use it right away and then dispose of it. And that can get pretty expensive for a small flock if you're opening these vials pretty regularly to give to your birds.
Sure.
The other thing is you need to, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, because most of those vaccines come in like bottles that have 2,000 doses. Like you can't get a bottle that is only for like 10 doses.
Right. Yeah, that would be great, wouldn't it? If we could get small flock sized doses. And generally you're talking about buying thousands of doses when you purchase your vaccine. And for small flock owners, we're going to be wasting thousands of doses. We're going to crack the vial, we're going to use it on our birds, and then we're going to discard the rest. And that's just the way it is currently. And that's not a problem. You're going to end up, spending $20, $30, $40 per vial to vaccinate your flock, but that's the price that we're going to have to pay to get that. Maybe someday vaccine companies will catch on that there's a good market for this, for dose sizes and vials that have maybe 50 or 100 doses in them. And if that could reduce the price, then that would be great for us. But right now that's really not available. And you do have to buy the big vial and waste a lot of it.
Yeah. Another area that we talk to folks about is what do you do if your local vet knows nothing about chickens? There's a lot of folks that, a lot of folks run into that. And I know recently, because of the backyard chicken movement, more veterinarians are taking like short courses on chickens, but what do you do if they know nothing about chickens? Is there someplace they can go to learn?
Yes, definitely. You've got two choices in that situation. Find another vet who is experienced at especially taking care of backyard birds, or you and your veterinarian learn together. And in that case, you're going to have a good relationship and be willing to make mistakes and be forgiving of that. But you can teach each other a lot. And there are a number of resources out there. Extension office has a lot of great information online. The universities, if you're lucky enough to live near a university that has a poultry science department, They're a great resource and oftentimes offer continuing education to veterinarians. The veterinary diagnostic lab is probably the most important connection that a flock owner should make and their veterinarian, because it's likely that near any of us flock owners, we have a veterinary diagnostic laboratory, usually run by the state, that offers diagnostic services, testing for your birds. Oftentimes that's subsidized, so it's not terribly expensive. But normally that test is a post-mortem. That's where you're going to find the most information and find out what's wrong with your flock. So we're not talking about individual bird medicine in that case. We're talking about the organism whose health we're concerned with is the flock. And we're talking about keeping that flock healthy. And in that case, doing a postmortem or a necropsy, which is an animal postmortem, gives you the most information about what's going on with your flock. And that's what the veterinary diagnostic laboratories can do for you. They can do some live bird testing, but they're going to get the best information if you can take them either a sick or a recently dead bird and find out what is going on in that flock. And it's really important. Go ahead.
Sorry, they typically want the live bird if they can, isn't that right?
Well, they want either a sick bird that will be euthanized, sacrificed, and then tested, or a very fresh dead bird. Those would be the ideal birds to use. And they will generally, if you bring them the sick bird, they'll euthanize it humanely and then perform the necropsy on that to give you information about what was going on. And then you can use that information to prevent and control a disease problem in your flock. And the important thing to work out with your veterinarian is, what's your purpose for raising birds? Some of us want want individual bird medicine, and we want to have the longest lifespan possible for a bird, regardless of whether or not she lays another egg in her life. We may not care. In that case, I would recommend seeking out an avian and exotic veterinarian, somebody who specializes in pets birds like parrots, and they can provide top-notch individual bird medicine. That can be expensive, but that may not be an issue for certain people. On the other hand, if you are raising your birds for meat and eggs for your family or for sale, or if you have other goals like a breeding flock, then you need to let them know that that is your focus. And in which case you're going to be looking more at flock health, controlling and managing problems for the flock, rather than focusing on an individual bird. In that case, you're probably not going to go for an X-ray. You're going to be focusing on, what's this disease problem I have in my flock and how can I prevent it from causing losses in the future? And also, how can I make sure that my meat and eggs are safe for consumption if I need to treat for a disease? So you really need to be open with your veterinarian about what your goals are for your flock and work that out with them.
For the people that are raising breeding birds, do you want to talk a little bit about NPIP? Because I see a lot of folks want to get into breeding and they've never heard of the program, and why should they be part of it? And a lot of folks get a little bit worried because it's like inviting Big Brother into your coop. They're like, nope, don't want to do that. But can you talk a little bit about this program, and that it's indeed not Big Brother coming to, check out what you have on your farm? I love my inspector and she's the best. And so, could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, that's got a long and fascinating history. That is the National Poultry Improvement Plan. And it was founded in the 1930s at a time when a certain disease called Piedmont disease was wiping out a lot of flocks. It wasn't doing much to the adult birds, but it was killing all of the chicks. And so it was making it impossible for poultry farmers to raise flocks. It was really, really cutting into their ability to operate. And so this was a cooperative venture between the industry, between poultry farmers and their state veterinarians and the federal government. So it was a cooperative effort. All three got together and formed this voluntary program to clean up Piedmont disease. And we still have that today. So 90 years later, we have a Pulorum Clean program. And that's the basis of NPIP. And so if you want to breed birds and send chickens or other baby poultry across state lines, either as day-old poultry or hatching eggs, you're going to need to be NPIP participant, which means that you'll have an inspector associated with NPIP who would come and visit your flock, check things out, take some samples, make sure your birds are testing negative for Pulorum disease, and then you're a voluntary participant in the program, and you'll be eligible to move your birds across state lines. And some people even participate in an international trade. So the program has grown over the years, and we've added a few more diseases. And that's an important point about NPIP. It doesn't cover all poultry diseases. It just covers certain ones that have really high consequence to raising poultry and make it difficult for us to raise poultry if we have those diseases. Over the years, they've added Mycoplasma Clean program and also Avian Influenza program. And in some states, small flock keepers can participate in those other programs as well. So generally the Pulorum program is open to, flocks of all sizes and types. And then in some states, you can also participate in the Mycoplasma Clean and Avian Influenza Clean programs. And in which case they would also take samples and test your flock for those diseases periodically and make sure that you're clean and eligible to share your birds with other people. And it just gives your buyers and your customers some assurance that somebody else has looked at your flock and said it appears healthy and managed well, and they've tested negative for certain diseases. So it's a really great program to be involved in, and actually essential if you're going to be breeding birds and sending baby birds across state lines.
Yeah, it's typically not very expensive, or I mean, it's little to no cost, And
yeah, we're lucky in North Carolina. We've got a nice program. Other states, it does the prices vary. Each state can set their program.
Yeah, and I forgot to unplug my phone. The other thing, we volunteered for the AI monitoring program, which I think is fabulous for trying to track avian influenza. And they come and test our birds the same time as the NPIP testing, which is just once a year. And then they come a second time to test for AI. And I wanted to move towards avian influenza because you've had quite a bit of experience with this, and Europe just had a major outbreak, and 'tis the season here for yes. people to start worrying about it. And so, what are the threats with avian influenza, and what can you do for your flock if it's heading your way? Because it's really frightening stuff.
It is, yeah. And Europe, Asia, and Africa have had a really bad time of it over the past year with the avian influenza outbreaks that are ongoing there. And we are very concerned. Avian influenza is carried by wild birds, especially ducks. And ducks are really good at carrying it around and not having any symptoms at all. And the type of ducks I'm talking about are the dabbling ducks, like the mallards and the other ones that you might see on ponds. And they migrate. So they bring the virus with them. They're not really affected by it, and they can give it to other birds wherever they're nesting and breeding and flying around. And so we see outbreaks of avian influenza here in the United States when generally they're started by the virus carried by a wild bird, and that gets into a domestic flock. And then people are really good at spreading it once it is introduced to the domestic flock. So that's why biosecurity is so important, because we're moving birds around, we're bringing home dirty crates, or we're sharing equipment or feeders or carriers with other people, and we're spreading the virus around that way. And as you know, with influenza viruses, they're highly contagious and they're very easy to spread around. And so once they get started in domestic flock, it is quite easy to spread that around by human activity, people moving around. So what we're concerned about with the situation in the rest of the world right now is that those migratory birds will start coming over from Europe and Asia up through Alaska and then down into the United States on 4 flyways. And normally when we see a big outbreak on the other side of the world, we'll start to see that virus or cousins of that virus start to show up in the United States the year after. So, we're looking at heightened concern coming into this next fall and then through next year that we might see that the virus that's circulating on the other side of the world, or because flu changes so quickly, we might see close cousins to that virus come over into the United States. And so we need to be really looking for signs of illness in our flocks and making sure that we report if you see a high death rate in the flock, you lose a lot of birds suddenly. That's something that we should be reporting to our veterinarian or to our state vet or to our veterinary diagnostic lab and letting them know that there's a problem, so that my flock doesn't. If my flock's infected, I could be spreading it to all of my neighbors and people in the area, and we want to try to prevent that from happening. So reporting is a really important piece of this. Biosecurity is always an important piece of this. The riskiest things you can do as a small flock owner is to allow your birds to drink out of a pond where wild ducks are living. You really don't want them to be sharing water sources with them or getting close to wild ducks. Another risky thing is, let's face it, having your birds outside is what we all want to do. And we love for them to have that lifestyle, but it's risky. And wild birds that come and visit your flock can bring the virus and share it with them. So, doing anything you can to prevent wild bird contact with your flock is important. And that could be overhead netting on your runs. It could be complete confinement, just keeping them inside their coop all the time, and minimizing feed spills and not putting food pans outside that will attract wild birds. So feed your birds under cover inside a building. Water sources that might attract birds that's another risk. Try to feed and water your birds, indoors, and whatever you can to try to just keep the wild birds from sharing space with your flock.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd like to change subjects a little bit and talk more prophylactically speaking, in ways that you can keep your birds really healthy. And I think it all starts with really good nutrition. And again, a lot of beginners don't understand. They know there's chick feed and adult feed, but there's some subtleties in between that. And so how do you plan for good nutrition through each of the different stages of the bird's life? And, and are vitamin supplements needed, or maybe probiotics? How do you make sure that the nutrition you're giving your birds is optimal for their life cycle?
Yeah, this is definitely a Goldilocks subject, right? There's a lot of overkill, and there's people on the other side of the spectrum. I've met first-time flock owners that decided that they were going to raise their birds, grow birds, exclusively on pasture. That's not going to happen. And in fact, one person that I spoke to lost 50% of his flock trying to do that. Even in June, when you've got lush green grass and juicy bug life everywhere, your flock's only going to get about 25% of their nutrition max from the great outdoors. So they're really, a flock is always going to need you to provide them feed. And unless you're a nutritionist and you got your ration balancer calculator and you really love to do this stuff like I used to do, just stick with a commercial diet, because they've got nutritionists who have been working on that and testing it and refining it, and you don't have to overthink it. You can buy the bag that's meant for the life cycle that you're feeding. So your grower for your chicks. Sometimes there'll be a meat bird diet that you can use when they're a little bit older if you're raising, say, broiler or meat chickens. And then a layer diet, right at about 14, 16 weeks, go ahead and move your young birds that are meant for egg laying, move them onto a layer diet at that point. And that layer diet's going to be rich in calcium that they're going to need to make good eggshells. And that's really all they need. You don't need to be supplementing them. And in fact, the danger is of diluting what's in that bag of that balanced nutrition by adding a lot of additional supplements. So you really want to keep scratch grains, which are like candy for them. It's just carbs. Or the supplements that you can purchase. There are a lot of them out there now. They're really identifying our market, right? And they're selling to us, but they really don't need a lot of that. They need what's in that nutritionally balanced bag of commercial feed. So try not to dilute what you're feeding with a lot of additional supplements, with scratch grains, with table foods. There's no reason you can't use those as treats, right? Here and there. It's great to utilize your flock as cleaning up your kitchen scraps. They'll do a great job at that, but it shouldn't be their predominant part of their diet. The majority of their diet should come from that commercially balanced feed.
Yep. I find with the rare breeds, and I know in particular for my Krebs, I've had to add vitamin supplements to improve fertility, because a lot of these rare breeds do have some tight inbreeding issues, and I've found the vitamin supplements help a bit, but it's water soluble, and it's not over the top. But I do find for my Krebs, I've been able to improve the fertility with vitamin supplements. But I'm with you there on people go overboard with mealworms, and so many people think they can feed scratch grains as a diet. Like, no.
Yeah, they're going to run into trouble with that.
Yeah. And there's just all kinds of goodies coming out there that are really kind of scary. Some of the bags, I got a bag of fly larvae, I think, and I opened the bag and it was just, I'm not feeding
the chickens loved it though. And that's another important part of it, is that they're not vegetarians. Anybody who's seen a hen go mousing or consume baby snakes, you realize that these guys are little dinosaurs and they will eat just about anything.
Oh yeah, that's the thing I miss most about my Buckeyes was those suckers. I never had a mouse problem with Buckeyes. They just would gobble them down. We never had trouble, and we don't have too much trouble with the Krebs, but the Buckeyes, man, they were like, red raptors. They were unbelievable. The other thing that I hear a lot, where, I'm trying to bring up issues that I hear from newbies all the time, and a lot of them think you could feed your chickens diatomaceous earth to solve all your internal parasite problems. And how is it best for people to deal with parasites if they suspect they've got coccidia or they see like worms in their stool? What should they do?
Well, DE, let's talk about that first. Diatomaceous earth, it's great for the outside of the chicken. It doesn't do a thing on the inside. And there are lots and lots of studies, and there will be many people who argue with me, but it's not going to do anything about internal parasites. It works beautifully on the outside as far as desiccating mites and lice and keeping the external parasites down to a dull roar. DE can be quite effective. But DE fed to the chicken, it's just going to make you feel better and take a few dollars out of your pocket. So that's not something that I recommend. If you do see parasites, in the stool, or if you got some coccidiosis issues, I'd really suggest that you reach out to a veterinarian who can help you manage that. And it's probably more than we can go into right now, but there are some very effective medications that can be used as dewormers. You always have to be concerned about using any medication with a laying hen. there are very few that are approved for use in laying hens because a hen will pass on any medication she receives to her eggs and then to the people who consume them. So you need to be very careful about medicating any hen that's laying eggs for human consumption. Yeah, there are some very effective medications for internal parasites of all sorts, but you need to figure out what those are so you use the right drug. And it's not DE.
Yeah. I will say, you're right, DE works great on the external stuff. And it's also important to mention, you treat the birds, but you also treat the coop. And I know whenever I've had outbreaks of lice or any external parasites, treating the birds and the coop are really important. And the recommendation, if I remember right, is like do at least 2 treatments 2 weeks apart. Is it? It's been a while since I've had to do it, but
for treating the coop.
For treating the birds in the coop, you do a couple of treatments. It's not a one and done kind of thing.
No, you're going to be doing and using things like DE or garden sulfur or those types of compounds. What you're really talking about is just managing it. You're probably not going to eradicate mites or lice by using those types of products, but they can keep them down to the point where they're really not bothering you or the birds. My favorite way to give to administer preventive for mites and lice is through dust baths and providing a nice dust bath for your birds and let them do it themselves, right? It's pretty tough to spray all your birds and get them powdered all over and get them treated, but let them do it themselves, and they really enjoy that. And there are several recipes that you could use for an effective dust bath. The 3 that I like to recommend would be the DE, so diatomaceous earth and sand mixed 50-50. Provide a dry dust bathing area, because if it gets wet, they're not going to get down and roll in it. You need to keep that area dry, and then you should recharge it every month. So put a fresh batch of DE and sand mix in there every month. The most effective, though, I think, but it stinks, is the garden sulfur. And so you get the powdered garden sulfur that's used as a soil amendment. It's used to make soil fertility better, available at just about any hardware store. And you mix that garden sulfur, stinks like rotten eggs. You mix that about 25%, so 1/4 to 3/4 sand. You can get the playground sand in a bag and mix those together. Again, recharge it every month. But the sulfur is highly effective against the external parasites. And then the other one, if it's available in your area, is kaolin clay, KAOLIN. And that mixed 50-50 with sand, playground sand, and recharged monthly is also an effective one. And I know people who use wood ashes with good success. So 50-50 wood ash to sand ratio, as long as you're just burning clean wood, you're not treated lumber, not plastic, not any of that other stuff. You just had a nice campfire. And you can use those cooled wood ashes in with your sand. And all of those
we use that a lot.
Basically, that's what it is it's drawing out the parasites and making it a very unhospitable place for the parasites to live.
Well, this gives us a lot of food for thought. Brittany, are there any questions? There's got to be questions out there for poultry medicine. Are there any?
The number one cause of death, the backyard chickens. I can't talk enough. It's predation. And that's something everybody learns the hard way. Everything likes to eat chicken, and you've got to take extreme measures to protect your birds and make sure that they're not going to be eaten by something else. So, we talk about bacteria and viruses, but the biggest thing that's out there killing them is the opossums and the raccoons and the hawks and the foxes and the owls and the snakes. So, you really have to learn what's in your neighborhood and how to protect your birds from those threats.
Absolutely.
Oh, great.
All right, let's see what we've got from our audience. Hi, Lisa Marie. Thanks for joining us today. We're so glad you're part of Chicken Chat Tuesday. Let's see. Lisa also says, we suggest to check for leg mites when getting new birds.
Yes, you definitely don't want to bring home birds with leg mites because your rest of your birds will get leg mites. Yeah.
What does it look like if they have leg mites? They look like little black spots under the scales, right?
You may not necessarily see the mites in that case. What you're going to see is the deformity to the scales on the legs. So the scales will be raised and roughened and crusty looking. And the more advanced the case, the really ugly it gets. But you're going to see the signs of the damage from the leg mites, perhaps more than seeing the leg mites themselves. So look for rough shanks, the lower leg that's scaly. On your feather-legged shanks, that's a little harder to see that they've got an issue, but you'll see that the scales just don't look smooth and clean like they should.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. Let's see. Hi, Madge. Thanks for joining us today. We're glad you're here. Madge is considering getting ducks. A neighbor has a good number of buffs in incubation right now. So any advice for somebody?
Wonderful. I love ducks. They're peaceful. They make love, not war. Like chickens or dinosaurs, the ducks are pretty peaceful to keep. Problem is, ducks are so messy. You gotta love it. You gotta love the mud and the mess. But yeah, ducks are great. And compared to chickens, relatively disease-free. So that's another bonus.
Well, yeah, they are pretty tough, aren't they?
They are. They are.
I love it. Well, good luck with your new ducks, Madge. That's exciting.
Absolutely. Have fun.
Hi, Jeffrey. Thanks for joining us today. We're glad you're here. Sorry, Julie, I'm just going to cut you off while I read Jeffrey's question. Jeffrey says he's new to this. I hear people talking about how soon they can dress out their meat birds and that older birds are only good for the stew pot. Is there a sweet spot age where they go from good fryers to stew pot only? And how much does this vary by breed?
Oh, Jeanette, you want to dive into this, don't you?
Oh my gosh. When I hear people say, just a stewed chicken, I cringe because you do not know what you're missing.
Absolutely.
It depends on what kind of cooking technique you're using. Obviously, fryers, high heat, short cooking time. You want a young animal with, the chicken that, you get at Kentucky Fried Chicken or something like that. They're only like 8 weeks old, with, heritage birds and backyard birds, you're probably going to butcher more towards, if it's a fast growing hybrid, maybe, 12 weeks of age. But it depends on what you want. If you want a roasting chicken, then it's going to be more towards 18 weeks. Or if you have a slower growing variety, even 20 to 24 weeks. And what we've discovered, and during the lockdown, I had plenty of time to play around with cooking, and I've discovered the most delectable birds that we've produced thus far are roosters and hens. And I've learned how to cook them so that they are just juicy and luscious, and a lot of it is thanks to which Brittany can attest to, because we went to a cooking class with Ariane Dagon, and we learned a technique about poaching. And so the day before, like say you've got a bird that's a year or two old, or a hen, and you'll take a pot of water and you'll bring it to a simmer, and then you'll take your chicken and put it in the simmering water for 20 minutes. And this poaches your bird. After the 20 minutes, you shut the fire off and allow that to cool overnight. Make sure the pot's cool enough that you can put it in the fridge. You don't want to put it in when it's still warm. That's not good. But then you let it set overnight. And then the following day is when you do the final cooking. And it sounds complicated. It's really not. It just takes a little bit of, planning. And then the next day you can put it on a rotisserie or bake it in the oven, and it comes out absolutely luscious. And I'd recommend the chicken getting to room temperature before you put it in the oven. And we even learned you can slip some butter underneath the skin like you kind of slide your hand under the skin, separating the skin from the meat. No holes, don't poke holes in the skin. And then
no.
and put butter there, and before you poach it, it's just amazing. I had a rooster in the oven. He was inside a Dutch oven, in an oven, and I was outside 50 feet away doing the chicken coops, and I could smell it cooking. It was just so beautiful. The other thing you can do with the older birds is wet cooking method and slow. And so what you'll do rather than the poaching is you'll take the bird and put it in a Dutch oven with, your veggies. And I like to fill it up halfway with some chicken stock, throw that in the oven at 275 for 3 to 3.5 hours. And it comes out beautiful. It's soft, it's moist. It just peels off the bone. It's wonderful. And, time equals flavor, and those older birds have an amazing flavor. So, just a stew hen, they're wonderful. They can actually be quite flavorful. So a lot of, I've always been told to go to the old cookbooks that were done around the beginning of the 20th century, and you can find stuff online. And that's back at a time where, chickens was still being raised outside. They weren't commercial birds, and you can get some tips that way too.
Yeah, or the 1950s. That's the kind of cookbook that you need. My favorite was the pressure cooker, and you can make just lovely coq au vin in the pressure cooker, and then the Dutch oven technique for the older birds. My cutoff age, I'd say anything after about 16, 18 weeks with my heritage birds. I would always use an older bird method with them, and with your young birds and your meat chickens. You're going to be able to do anything with them. You can throw them, on pan fry them if you want to. But the older birds, you need to reserve those for special cooking techniques. And then you get the advantage is the flavor. They're much more flavorful and they're juicier if you cook them properly. If you don't, you got a hard rubber ball that no one's going to enjoy.
Yeah. Oh, but they're so good.
Yes. That was a great question, Jeffrey. Thank you for that. Let's see. Hi, April. Thanks for joining us today. Give me 1 second, Julie. Many people use permethrin garden dust powder to treat lice and mites. I continue to see chicken keepers post on various Facebook groups that it is a safe method. Do you agree? My personal opinion is that it is a chemical as it is synthetically produced. I have been wondering if there is a way to use actual chrysanthemum flowers to help. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think you can make it easier on yourself and not go to extracting pyrethrin from chrysanthemum flowers, but just go ahead and buy the organic pyrethrin products that are out there, as there are pyrethrins. Permethrin would be the synthetic version. Pyrethrins would be derived from the organic sources. And so look for the OMRI, OMRI label on the product and see that it's a pyrethrin, and you can use those, and it's a whole lot easier on you than trying to make that extraction, directly from the chrysanthemums. That's the way to go. If it's on the label, there are a number of permethrin products out there that are going to be safe to use as long as you're using them according to label directions. But if you choose to use an organic labeled product, then look for that label and use a pyrethrin.
Great question, April. Thank you for that. Well, I think that wraps up our questions. So if anybody has any more, write them in and we'll get to them. Otherwise, Jeanette, did you have any more questions for Julie?
Oh, I could go on for hours with it.
I'd be happy to.
Yeah. When you meet another chicken geek.
Allow me to do a plug.
Oh, yes, please.
Your second book, when you get your chickens, the first one should be Raising Chickens, and then this one would be once you're into it a little while and you start running into some problems. The Chicken Health for Dummies will help you out. This is meant to be a self-help guide, so that you can help yourself out.
And who's the author of that wonderful book?
Well, that would be me.
That's exciting. Yay. Yes, please check out Julie's book and read all about it. That's awesome.
I had a question. Does every state have a the state ag department put out maps of disease outbreaks within states so you know if there's anything happening near you?
They definitely put out alerts. And normally a press release is definitely, any state that runs into an avian influenza outbreak, a highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreak, or other important poultry disease is going to have a press release about that. They typically don't give out the exact location. I'm sure, if we were affected, we wouldn't want our address being given out. But they will tell you, the general area, usually the county level that's affected, and put out advisories for people who own poultry and what they can do to protect their flocks. The other important message that the states will usually put out is to watch for signs of illness in your birds, especially sudden death in a large number of your birds. You need to report that either to your veterinarian. If you don't have a veterinarian, report it to your state vet. So find out who that is now, grab their toll-free number at this point, before you're worried about it. And then another option would be your veterinary diagnostic lab. So find out where that is, where the nearest one is for you, or your agricultural cooperative extension office. So you can make a report to any of those places. State vet's probably your best, quickest way to alert people to a problem in your flock as far as that goes. But if you check out your state vet's website, they will post what's going on as far as poultry disease outbreaks.
Okay. And I had one last thing, because I know we've talked about it before. People love their chickens, and sometimes they love them a little bit too much. And the issue is salmonella raises its ugly head because people do things that probably aren't all that smart. And could you set the record straight about the threat of salmonella and some of the things you really shouldn't be doing with your chickens?
Yeah, these are pretty well common sense. And, although people will say, salmonella, it's just a little GI illness. With certain people, especially very young children and older adults and people who have immune system problems, salmonella can be extremely serious. And birds are natural hosts for salmonella strains. And we just have to expect that, a certain proportion of them are going to carry it. And it's shed in the feces, so it's in the poop. And so you really want to, if the transmission is poop to mouth, okay? So you got to wash your hands. Don't kiss the chicken. Please don't raise your baby chickens in your kitchen or let your ducks swim in your kitchen sink. I see those all the time on Facebook, the little ducklings swimming around in the kitchen sink. I think, oh gosh. And those are frequently in households that have children under 5, which is, really alarming. So, keep some distance from your birds, have them in a area away from where people eat, and wash your hands. Make sure the children are washing their hands after they're handling the birds, and don't snuggle with them. And those are just common sense precautions that can help you avoid any minor GI illness all the way up to, the horrible consequences of a bad salmonella infection.
Mm-hmm.
CDC's got some great resources on their website as far as how to prevent salmonella infections from pet poultry. And we're seeing it every year, during chick season. People are new to raising chickens, and they bring them home and they get salmonella outbreaks. So we need to really keep an eye on it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's all really great advice. And do we have any more questions?
Yeah, we got one more. April says, what about farm tours with regards to biosecurity issues? Any advice to keep my flock and grounds safe while also providing education?
Yes, that's a great question. And there are more and more resources available for people who want to engage in agritourism out there. So if you, sorry, I'm just going to tell you to Google it because I don't have the websites off the top of my head right now. But if you plug in biosecurity for agritourism, And the idea there is that you're protecting your animals and you're also protecting the public who are in contact with your animals, because disease goes both ways. And so there are a number of things that you can do, primarily avoiding direct contact between the public and animals. So, the petting environment needs to be handled really carefully. If you allow it at all, you need to be very conscious of hand washing and making sure nobody's eating and drinking around the animals and that everybody's washing their hands. But there are a number of biosecurity planning resources that you can use to develop your own site-specific for your farm plan for contact, public settings where there are animals. Yeah, that's a great question. It's really important as more and more people are wanting to go and visit farms and see. And I don't think we should be shutting that down, but I think we should be managing the risk and finding ways to do that relatively safely.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you, Julie, so much. This has been really fascinating, and I love the fact that we could bring an expert in here and just set the record straight, because, all of these things we talked about are just such common questions we hear all the time, and really appreciate you coming on. This has been great stuff, and I hope we can get you back another time, maybe on Duck Month or Turkey Month.
Oh, that would be great. I love ducks.
Yeah.
And then have me back for Turkey Month,
Duck
please.
Month. When's
Thank
Duck
you so
Month,
much.
Brittany? Is that August?
Yes, I think Ducks is in August.
Okay,
we'll pencil you in, Julie.
All right, very good.
She'll be back. Bring all of your duck questions. It'll be great.
Yeah.
Nobody will have any because they just don't get sick.
And they can outlay your chickens too. That's what stunned me about the duck.
Love.
Yeah.
Except everything likes to eat duck.
Yeah. That's true.
So true.
Guilty.
Well, thank you, Julie, and thank you everyone for tuning in today and all of your wonderful questions and comments. That's always my highlight. I'm always like, what's everyone going to ask? It's so great. You never know. It's perfect. And also thank you to all of our members and supporters for helping make programs like Chicken Chats possible and future Duck Chats, so that we can keep answering all of your questions and providing you with guests and opportunities to learn more. So we really appreciate you. If you're not a member and you want to become one, let us know. We would love to do another shameless plug about how to become a member. You can become a conservation champion for $4 a month. I think I drink more coffee than that. So I drank a lot of coffee. So if you couldn't tell right before this program. So but yes, tune in next month. We'll be back again with rabbits. We're doing rabbit chats. So we hope you'll have lots of questions and come hop along with us. I have to get a pun in today. It's my favorite. But yes, thanks again, everyone. And thank you, Julie. This was a lot of fun.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Have a great afternoon.